Hi, welcome to 5.1 Part 2. So in this part we're going backwards from what we did in Part 1. So in Part 1 we had the equations and we were finding the solutions. Now we have the solutions and we're seeing if we can find a quadratic equation that has these solutions. So if our x is 2, we can solve for 0. And so if we want 0 on this side, we would subtract 2 from both sides, and so that gives us x minus 2 equals 0, and we can do the same thing for this. X equals negative 4. We want 0 on this side, so we're going to add 4 to both sides, so we can say x plus 4 equals 0. So these are the two things that could equal 0. And if either one of them could equal 0, then multiply them together and we get 0. And then we want to write it in standard form, which means we want to actually do the multiplication out. So x times x is x squared, x times 4 is 4x, negative 2 times x is negative 2x, negative 2 times 4 is negative 8, and so we just combine those two terms and we get x squared plus 2x minus 8 equals 0. Okay, so you can do this if you want to, if that makes sense to you. Another way to do it is just to think about like 2, if 2 equals x, then x minus 2 is going to equal 0. If x is negative 4, then negative 4 plus 4 is going to equal 0. So you can either work it out like that, you can do it in your head, you can think about what makes sense, what would give you 0 from that. Let's do one more. We're going to do this one together. So same thing, if x equals 3/4, then x minus 3/4 would equal 0. And if x equals 1/5, then x minus 1/5 would equal 0. And so now we're just going to multiply. So x times x is x squared. X times negative 1/5 is negative 1/5 x. Negative 3/4 times x is negative 3/4 x. Negative 3/4 times 1/5, 3 times 1 is 3. 4 times 5 is 20, and then a negative times a negative is a positive. So all of that is going to equal 0. And then we need to combine those like terms. So with a 5 and a 4, 20 is going to be my denominator. So I've got negative 4/20 plus negative 15/20. That gives me negative 19/20. So I have x squared minus 19/20 x plus 3/20 equals 0. So that's my quadratic equation. Okay, you go ahead and try the other two and come back and take a look at the answers. There they are. And let's look at the problems on the bottom. So these are some types of real-world problems, simplified of course, that we can use this type of thing for. So for example, we've got a height of a flare like that's being shot. So we have our little like flare gun, and then here's the flare, it's being shot, and it can be approximated by the function h being the height equals negative 16t plus 95t plus 6, negative 16t squared, and t is the time in seconds. So we want the flare to hit the ground, meaning that our h equals 0, because this is our the ground. So the height is 0 there. So we're going to say our height is 0, negative 16t squared plus 95t plus 6, and then we need to factor that. So I'm going to do negative 16 times 6, and I get negative 96. So my factors are going to equal negative 96, and I want my sum to be 95. So that makes things kind of easy for me because I know that this times 1 is going to be is always going to be a factor, and when I add them together, it's going to get that if one's negative and one's positive. So I have positive 96 times negative 1, and when I add those together, that gives me 95. So I'm going to rewrite it. 0 equals, and if it makes you more comfortable, you can put this stuff on the left side and the 0 on the right side if you like that. So negative 16t squared plus 96t minus 1t plus 6. So factor by grouping, I'm going to factor out a 16t, and then this still gives me negative t plus 96 divided by 16t is 6. And then here I'm just going to factor out a positive 1. And so I get negative t plus 6 equals 0. So that's 16t plus 1. Negative t plus 6 equals 0. So if I have 16t plus 1 equals 0, 16t equals negative 1, so t equals negative 1/16. And then this one, negative t plus 6 equals 0. I'm going to move the t to the other side, and so I get t equals 6. So I have the time equals 6 seconds or negative 1/16. I cannot have negative time, so it's got to be this one. So my answer is 6 seconds for that one. Okay, moving on. We want to write an equation that could be used to find two consecutive even integers whose product is 24. So this is taking something we've done before and kind of using it with our new application. So we're just going to let our x be the first integer. And then if x is the first integer, if they're two even integers, x plus 2 is going to be the second integer. And we know that the product, meaning when we multiply them, is going to be 24. So we have x times x plus 2 equals 24. So now we're going to put this in standard form so we can factor it. So multiply that out, x squared plus 2x. I'm going to move the 24 over here, so minus 24, so that I have 0 on the other side. And then I'm going to factor. So I want my factors to multiply to get negative 24, and I want my sums to be positive 2. So if I do negative 6 and 4, I get negative 2, but if I do 6 and negative 4, I get positive 2. So that's what I want to use. X plus 6, and then x minus 4. So if I set both of these equal to 0, x plus 6 equals 0, then x is negative 6. And if I set x minus 4 equal to 0, then x is equal to 4. So on this one, if I have x equals negative 6, that's my first integer. I add 2, and that gives me the second integer. So negative 6 and negative 4. If I multiply those together, those do give me 24, and they're consecutive even integers. And then this one, if I have 4, and then I add 2, that gives me 6. 4 and 6 are consecutive even integers whose product is 24. Okay, a little bit more here. So on this one, if we have x minus 2 times x minus 3 equals 5, can we set both of them equal to 5? No, we cannot, because the reason we can set it equal to 0 is because if the product of them equals 0, one or the other of them equals 0, but just because they equal 5, one of them does not necessarily equal 5. So one factor, let's see, I'll just put 1 does not necessarily equal 5. And why we set each factor equal to 0 when we're solving a quadratic equation is because if they multiply to get 0, then one of them has to be 0. Okay, make sure you write down any questions that you have so that we can talk about them in class.